Dance Floor Classics with Kef, innovators in sound.
Good evening, this is Solar Radio. My name is Les Adams. Welcome to this week's edition of Dance Floor Classics. 2 hours of classic jazz, funk and soul brought to you in association with Kef, innovators in sound. When I decided to build this studio at home, there were two main criteria. It had to be easy to operate because there are lots of different people who use the facility and they tend to get a bit overwhelmed by lots of knobs and buttons. So it has to be very simple to operate, and this is. But probably over and above that, the emphasis was on quality and getting the best possible sound we could get. I listened to so much radio that is over compressed and just sounds awful, and everybody's trying to be the loudest. With this studio, we don't try and make the loudest programs, we try and make the best quality programs with good dynamic range, good quality audio, and that really is the main purpose behind it all. It's a mixture of digital, state-of-the-art digital, and there's some quite old analog equipment in here. For example, the mixer is digital, it's 96K 24-bit processing. The recorders are, all the editing equipment is. But when it comes to the actual audio processing, such as compression and limiting, we use some BSS units, which are actually 1990s analog units. They just sound better, and that's why we use them. So every bit of equipment really has been chosen, partly for its functionality, but also because it just sounds good. I think the mix I'm most proud of would be Cameo. The work I did for Cameo, I did several mixes for them. I remixed the track Word Up, and I did some mega mixes which were medleys of their songs, and they were very well received. And they probably turned out best, partly because the music that I had to work with actually blended together very well, so it was easy to do it well. I think as far as an actual remix was concerned, I did a track called This Is Acid by Maurice, a producer called Maurice Joshua, who on the back of that turned into quite a superstar remixer himself. I completely rebuilt that track and it was #1 on the Billboard chart in America, and I'm very proud of that mix, I think. So for the US market it would be the Maurice track, for England it was Cameo. Soul music is all encompassing, and it can be applied to things that people wouldn't normally apply it to. I think it's anything that moves me. Greatest soul artist for me would be a man we recently lost, Bobby Womack, and of course James Brown. Incredible thing about James Brown, of course, was you could never understand a word he was singing, but it was fantastic. Otis Redding singing a song. He may not be as technically perfect as the likes of Diana Ross or Mariah Carey, but he sings with soul, he sings with passion, he sells you the song. I think pirate radio has been probably the single most important thing that's happened, or that happened in music in the last 50 years. Pirate radio completely revolutionised radio, not just in this country but all over the world, but particularly in the UK. They were able to give the public what the BBC couldn't, but also didn't want to. And so pirate radio really just changed everything, the music scene, everything. My first pirate radio broadcasts were actually with a land-based radio station called Radio Jackie. I've got 2 convictions under the Wireless Telegraphy Act of 1949 to prove that. And after that, in fact, I had to start pre-recording my shows, because in those days, if you got caught 3 times, you'd like to go to prison. So I started pre-recording my shows, so I wasn't actually there when they went out. And it's actually quite nice now to have the broadcast without looking over your shoulder, wondering if you're going to be arrested.
Transmission sites for solar radio in the 1980s were primarily up at Crystal Palace in South London. For obvious reasons, it's got great height advantage, and it's where all the BBC and independent transmitters are. Although the transmitter was actually at Crystal Palace, the studio was linked via a microwave link in those days, which I developed, which was quite a bit of a first for pirate radio. So the studios were some places in West Norwood, similar places, not too far away. So that when the, as they were known as the DTI in those days, used to bust it, they would mainly take off the transmitter and not the studio, which was the expensive bit. So I was one of the people that used to build the transmitters for solar radio and others, so we'd just pop up to Crystal Palace and put another transmitter and carry on. It is all about playing great soul music, and from people who know their music, and there's a load of people out there playing soul music, but we have a lineup which I think is one of the strongest. Where you're going, you've got to know where you come from. And in the last 30 years, we come from The only way to get music to people in the 1980s was either via FM radio or via cassette tapes. And then we moved on into the 90s with satellite distribution. Within 2 years, solar was on Sky Digital. We started this incarnation of solar radio in 1998 on the old analog satellite, which I considered was the way forward for solar radio. Satellite became an open playing field for people. What we're seeing now is that the internet is now the first choice for listening to these type of stations and consuming media, almost full stop. FM radio is long left behind, really. It's still being listened to, of course. But digital satellite has its place. So where solar radio is going, which is why we're investing into apps and mobile devices, you know, so we can be heard on those, is of course via the internet.
Solar radio has been running for, well, legally for about 15, 16 years now, but it's still run with the same enthusiasm as the pirate station was, and that's what makes it different from the stations that are regulated. I mean, solar radio is obviously regulated by the Broadcasting Authority and so on, but in terms of music policy, we have our own music policy and we play what the people, our listeners, want to hear. We don't have to worry about the commercial aspect of it so much, and that's what makes solar so unique. There was something quite attractive about doing something illegal, but as you get older, you start to realise that's probably not quite so comfortable. I don't think I want to do it now.